Hello everyone. Hey Saim, thanks for tuning in. It's been quite a while since I last streamed, over a year. Hey Lucas, how you doing? I hope the streaming quality is good enough. I tested it out earlier today, but as I said, my last live stream was in April of last year, so about 15 months ago. Almost 15 months ago. So we'll see how it goes. I'm not sure how far we will get today, but the goal is to implement or to start working on an intermittent fasting tracker. Um, right here, I'm calling it interval fasting because that's how it's called in German. It's Intervallfasten in German, but I think it's called intermittent fasting in English, but I just called the project interval fasting tracker. And hello, Lorenzo. How you doing? So I've seen that a few people are already tuning in. Let's give everyone a second to catch up. I also just tweeted about the stream. So I'm not sure how many people have already seen the link to actually join the stream. I'm also hoping that Xcode will play along nicely today because I have been having some issues as of Xcode 15 Beta 2, but mostly when I'm working on a VisionOS project. So no matter if I have the simulator open, the preview open, both or neither of them, Xcode starts to really lag for me, which yeah, is interesting. Xcode also has some weird background noise when I'm running a VisionOS project. Even when I don't have the simulator or the live preview running, it always has some kind of background some kind of background music for VisionOS. I would guess that it's always running in VisionOS, but for some reason it's always running in Xcode 15 for me when I'm working on VisionOS projects, which is very weird, but not an issue whatsoever. Just a funny thing. So there will be no camera for this stream. Since it is the first stream getting back into it, so I hope to be able to stream some more frequently, a bit more frequently in the future, but we will see how today goes and how everyone reacts to the replay video, and then I will also think about perhaps editing down the replay into a separate video of a few minutes. Not sure how that will go because obviously editing down a stream is a lot of work, so we'll see if that's worth it, but I'll give it a try. So Lucas is asking, did SwiftData get better already? Heard that there are some problems. Yeah, so in beta 1, I've heard from a few people on Twitter that the app group and iCloud integration worked nicely for them, but for me, neither of the two worked in the first beta, but I did manage to get app group integration to work in the beta 2. Well, managed to get it to work is a bit of an exaggeration because I just added the app group entitlement and did nothing else, and now it works, which didn't work in beta 1. So yeah, that got a bit better, but in beta 2 we now have the first version of VisionOS, and that does not integrate with SwiftData. So in particular, the add model macro is not supported on VisionOS right now. According to an engineer in the Apple developer forums. So I would guess that it will be available in a future beta version of VisionOS and of SwiftData, but yeah, right now we can't use SwiftData for VisionOS projects, which is why I'm also holding a bit back with the VisionOS videos, because I want to obviously show the newest technology in there. So right now I would have the option to create a core data app for VisionOS, but I think that most people would be interested in creating a SwiftData app for VisionOS. So I think I'll wait for beta 3 to see how that goes. And in the meantime, I'll look into perhaps working with an API on VisionOS instead and just start exploring how to build 2D UI using all of the Swift UI features we already know. And then all of the all of the newer stuff like a reality view and a model 3D that we can also look into those things. We don't need SwiftData for that. So Lorenzo says, what Mac are you using? Is a Mac Mini M2 enough for a student that wants to enter Apple development world. So this is an M1 Pro, MacBook Pro from 2021, I believe. I think I have it for 1.5 years now. And before that, I had an Intel i7 MacBook Pro, which was already a few years old, and it got really noisy while recording videos. The fans always went on while recording. So I decided to upgrade to an M1 Pro, and I had 0 issues so far, except for working on Vision OS projects, because then Xcode starts to lag, but I'm thinking that that's an Xcode issue, not an M1 Pro issue. And regarding your other question, an M2 Mac Mini should be plenty good to start developing iOS, macOS, and Vision OS apps. That should be enough for the next few years, I would expect. Of course, you then also need a keyboard, a mouse, a display, and so on. I fell in love with Retina displays. I can't use anything else anymore. It's really bad. So I would recommend you to get a really nice display as well. And also, thanks a lot, Roter Rudolf, for your donation. First time getting a donation for a live stream. Feels good, man. Feels good. Thank you. And then Saim says, iCloud syncing is strange with SwiftData. It doesn't support unique attributes at all. Yeah, that's what I've also found. And everything needs to be optional, which isn't ideal. Yeah, that is annoying. I agree. But that somehow makes it useless to use SwiftData instead of core data, right? Because that's what I really like about SwiftData, not having optionals, which you always had in core data, especially when using CloudKit. So I'm not sure how everything will go and how everything will work out in the future. We'll just have to give it a bit of time. Yeah, Lucas, so even M1 Pro lags on Vision OS. All right, so enough questions. It's been 9 minutes already and I haven't done anything in the stream. So Michaela was absolutely right in having to plan in more time for interacting with everyone in the chat. But keep the questions coming, and I'll try to get to every one of you, but I'll have to start working on the app now. So I just have an empty Xcode project there, which is configured using SwiftData, but we'll probably get rid of everything in there. And then I also have LaunchBuddy open here, which is the indie project management tool that I'm developing myself. And in here, I'm just keeping track of all the projects that I'm working on and all the apps that I'm working on. So I already created a project in here for the interval fasting tracker. But let's create a new task board. I'll just call it backlog for now. And in here, I can keep track of all of the features and ideas that me and perhaps you also have and that we want to implement in this series. So we'll see if I'll do everything in the live stream. I might do some stuff outside of the live stream or some stuff in videos. We'll see how that works out, or also just tweeting about it. Hashtag build in public. All right. So let's fill out our backlog. So I want to be able to track my fasting times. And for that, I want it to be super simple. So I'm thinking just have a large button in the app and then also have an interactive widget to start and end a fast. So I want to store most of the data in SwiftData. So store fasting results, I would call them, in SwiftData. I'm sorry if the text is very small here, but I can't really zoom in right now in LaunchBuddy. So I will be able to zoom in to Xcode, but not to LaunchBuddy. Sorry about that. By the way, you can find LaunchBuddy linked in the video description. I believe it should be linked in there. Or also just search for LaunchBuddy in the App Store. It's free, so if you want to give it a try, you can do that. SwiftData does work with widgets now for me using app groups, but it's not really real-time syncing right now for me, so that might still be a beta issue, or that's just how it is with app groups. I'm not sure, so I want all of that to be pretty much instant. So when starting and stopping a fast, I will just enable a Boolean flag in user defaults and share that with the widget. I think that's a bit of a nicer integration for the user. So I would say user defaults for is fasting flag, something like that. Then I will also write down, or I think that is good for this issue. So let's create another issue. So I will call that one interactive widget. And in there, I want to have different UI. depending on is fasting from user default. And I think I missed a letter there. Yeah. Also, the stream is delayed about 15 to 20 seconds, I would guess. So I'm trying it out with the default delay right now. Not too sure if that is too much. I just want to make sure that we don't run into any lag or any issues with the stream. Perhaps next time I will try it out with a lower delay, but we'll see. I think for now this shouldn't be an issue. I'll just be a bit slow to reply to chat, but I don't think that's an issue. Okay, so in the interactive widget, I want to have a button to start, stop fasting. I think it would also be very interesting to have a live activity. So I haven't looked into live activities in a bit because I'm not using them for any of my apps. And what's going on with the text field up here? Probably a SwiftUI bug, so I'll have to look into that in LaunchBuddy. But for the live activity, as far as I remember, they can only run for 10 hours. So I think that tracking the fast with a live activity doesn't make sense because that might very well be over 10 hours of duration. So I think it would be interesting to use a live activity to track the eating window, which is the time that the user is not fasting. So I think that could make sense, but that's something that we will look at once everything else is implemented. Okay, so then I want to have an overview of fasting time in the last week, month, year, whatever. And we will use the charts framework for that. I'm not sure yet whether I will actually release this app to the App Store. I'm just building it for myself right now because I am doing intermittent fasting. So we'll see, but I think overview of fasting times using charts could be a nice IAP feature, like for a subscription or whatever, which would also give us the opportunity to try out the new StoreKit paywall view. Not sure what it is called exactly, but I think it's called paywall. So use StoreKit's new paywall view. So I'll have to look into that before working on that in the stream, but it's probably super easy to set up, I would guess. All right. So I think that is a good backlog to start working on it right now. So yeah, as I said, this is LaunchBuddy. You can find it in the description. I just use it to plan out my apps and the tasks that I have and also the feedback that my apps get. So let's jump into Xcode finally. Let me zoom in a bit for you. So this is the pre-generated SwiftData iOS project. So let's see what's going on in there. So we have an item, right? So I think I'll just get rid of everything that I don't need anymore. So let's move the item to trash. And then in here, let's remove the query. Let's remove the navigation view and replace it with an empty view. We can also get rid of add and delete items. And we can comment out the model container for now. What I also find super annoying is that I have set my Xcode indentation to 2 spaces. But for some reason, new projects always use 4 spaces. So they are not reflecting your Xcode settings. I'm not saying that 2 spaces is superior. I enjoy both 2 and 4 spaces, but currently I really like 2 spaces just because, SwiftUI oftentimes has the pyramid of hell for indentation. So my thinking was that with 2 spaces, I can see more and have a quicker overview of where a certain closure starts and ends. But Xcode is not enjoying that whatsoever. So also in here, as you can see, let me select everything and re-indent. Not saying once again that 2 spaces is better, just saying I'm annoyed that Xcode doesn't care about its own settings, which is super weird in my opinion. Alright, so I haven't actually thought about where we want to start with this project. So I think the easiest way is to bring up the canvas. So let's do that real quick and resume the canvas. This might take a second while I'm streaming. Xcode is usually a bit slower, but okay, pretty quick, nice. Let me also refresh my chat window. Now I'm getting a few more chat messages, okay. Do you also use Swift format in Xcode for formatting or just the default format? I'm not using Swift format. I'm using SwiftLint for some projects, but for most of my dabbling around projects, I would call it, I'm not using any of that. I think that my indentation and formatting style is pretty clear already, and not a lot actually gets changed when I'm running SwiftLint. So I'm not using it for these smaller projects, but for bigger projects, I'm using SwiftLint. I've never used Swift format, so I have no idea how it works. As far as I understand, it's an editor extension, right? But I'll have to look into that at some point in the future as well. That's a good suggestion, yeah. I find it interesting that we have a model context in here and the preview is not crashing, despite us not providing a model container. So this means that there is probably some sort of default model context. And also, by the way, what's the exact type? Okay, it's just called model context. Okay, so yeah, interesting that we can use it from the environment, which makes sense. It's not optional and everything in the environment has a default value. Just very interesting to see that something that you have to actually explicitly create yourself through the model container has a default value in SwiftUI. I think I'll have to explore that and find out if we can actually save data using this default model context, or what will happen once we actually add some SwiftData models in there. But for now, let's work on a incredibly simple version of the app. So I will just start with a button with just some text. And in the closure here, I want to toggle whether the user is currently fasting or not fasting. And I want to do that through user default. So I'll add an add app storage property wrapper here, and I will just call it is fasting. This will be a Boolean. I like to always be explicit with my types at the member level. And by default, the user is not fasting. So when this first gets created, it will be set to false, which will then be stored in user defaults with the is fasting key. And then going forward, we can use that to determine whether the user is fasting or not. So this is currently not shared with a widget extension. This is just part of the view itself. And in the button, we will change the text depending on whether the user is fasting. So then I will say stop fasting. And if they're not fasting, I will say start fasting. So very, very simple stuff. And in here, I will just say is fasting.toggle. So I can tap the button if the preview works. Yeah. All right. And interestingly, there is some sort of matched geometry transition in there. So let me zoom in a bit, hoping you can see that. Interesting, because I did not provide a transition parameter anywhere. Very interesting. So that, I believe that changed in iOS 17. I don't think there was a default animation for button titles before. You can let me know if you know anything about that. And yeah, Lucas, you're absolutely right. Model context is basically the view context of core data. So before that, you had managed object context in the environment for core data. And now we have model context in the environment for SwiftData. This is used to insert and delete items in your SwiftData database. Yeah. Actually, you don't need to save the context anymore because SwiftData has autosave enabled by default, which is very nice. When you create your own model container here, though, you could explicitly initialize it, and you could say autosave is turned off. But I think for most simple apps, it makes sense to just keep it turned on because you don't have to save your model context all the time. Just saves you some work and some hassle and probably some bugs. I'm not sure about that. All right, so we now have this button in here, and I think I want to horizontally develop this app. So start with one feature and not actually persist all of my fasting times and whatever, and start looking into the interactive widget right now, just duplicating this logic in here, basically to the widget. I think that makes sense. Not sure about what you think in the chat, so if you have another suggestion, you can let me know. But I think it makes sense. In order to create our interactive widget, let's create a new target, and it's still selected a keyboard extension. Interesting. So for the widget extension, I will just call it IF widgets. IF for intermittent fasting, of course. We will not include a live activity, not include a configuration app intent, because we don't need a configuration app intent. And if I want to add a live activity, I want to implement that myself through code, just because I want to get a better understanding of it myself as well. And I think it's a better learning opportunity to write it yourself instead of using the auto-generated one. I think the auto-generated one is nice to get an overview of how it works. But then if you want to actually start using live activities, you should implement it yourself, not using the auto-generated stuff. So let's finish that and let's activate the scheme. All right, so we now have the IF tracker and the IF widgets folders up here. Also, as of iOS 16, I believe the structure of a widget extension changed. So we now have a widget bundle at the top level instead of a widget. And in the second file here, we have our timeline provider, simple entry, widgets entry view. And this used to be the entry point for a widget extension in iOS 15 or Xcode 13. As of the last version, we now have this widget bundle by default. We're not going to change that, so I can get rid of that. And then in here, we're also using the new preview macro, which has this very nice second trailing closure to provide timeline entry. So I haven't covered that in any of my WidgetKit videos yet, but you can now provide different timeline entries. In this case, it's just called a simple entry because that's the pre-generated one up here. And then you will have both of them available in the Xcode preview. So, oops, oh no, I just opened another Xcode version. So let me see how I can get rid of that. Give me a second. So I'm still here, just had to blur the screen to get rid of the second Xcode project. Oh God. Let's quit that. Okay, that should be good. So we're back with just Xcode 15 beta and not Xcode 14.3.1. So yeah. You have the timeline entries in here, and then you can click through them in the live preview here, and you can even play through them. Doesn't make too much sense, I believe, in this case, but super nice that we now have the opportunity to work on that. In our case, we probably don't care about it. So let me think about how we want to structure the widget. So let's first of all change the description to start and end a fast, and then here we can just call this fasting toggle or something like that. That could be the configuration display name. I think that could make sense. This should be a very short name, and then the description should be not more than 2 lines, I would say. So this is what's shown when adding a new widget to the home screen. I think this should be rather short as well, just so the user really understand what's going on. But in a nicely designed widget, you probably don't even need a description because the widget UI speaks for itself, so to say. And yeah, Lucas, I totally agree. The timeline feature is really nice, even though we're not using it in this project. I think it's really nice for some other projects. All right, so let's have a look at the view. So in there, we probably also just want a button, and we might be able to just copy that stuff from... So I'm not sure if we can use the app storage property wrapper in widgets now. It used to not be supported, I believe. So let's re-indent everything, get rid of the provider and other stuff again. So we used to not be able to use the app storage property wrapper. Not sure if it's available now, but we will see. Widget needs to adopt container background. That's right, I got rid of that. So there's a new API here that we need to use in WidgetKit, which is the container background. So I will say .background, so just the default color for widget. This means that our widgets will have the default background color. You could also supply a custom color in here, so we could say .orange. But yeah, we'll just go with .background. And I also covered that in one of the new widget kit videos, which you can have a look at on the channel after watching this live stream. Of course, don't click off right now. So obviously this button doesn't work because we have to use the new app intent based button in widgets. So let's change that, or let's actually first of all, how do I want to do this? So yeah, let's create a new file in our widget, just a Swift file, and I will call this, and let's make it part of the widget. I will call this toggle fast intent. All right, and that will import app intents. This will be a struct called toggle fast intent, and this is also a new Xcode 15 feature where it suggests a type name based on the file name. Very nice. So this will be an app intent. And let me see, I think we need a title and a description. Right, so the title can just be a string, and the description, or this has to be optional. This will be, we can do that from a string literal as well. Okay. So the title will be toggle your fast, or let's do the exact same title as we did for the widget. So let's say fasting toggle, and then let's also do start and end a fast for the description, intent description. And then what was the function call? I think it was called perform, right? Yeah, it's called perform. Okay, so let's see what's still missing. Declares an opaque return type, but has no return statements. Okay, so in here we can just return dot result, just an empty result like that. In this widget, it doesn't really matter. All right, so that's looking good. So now we can implement the toggle functionality in this perform method. But before we can do that, we need to create an app group identifier and make both of our targets conform to that. I will quickly switch off the screen again while I'm adding the app group entitlement, just so I'm not showing anything in the project settings window, which I might regret at some point in the future. I'm not sure if any of that stuff should be kept private, or if I can share my app group identifiers. I'm not sure, so I'll just turn off the screen real quick and create a new app group identifier, and then we can start implementing this toggle fast intent. So yeah, let's switch back to this thing in here, and let me actually change the text from starting soon to be back in a sec. Okay. I hope that works in the stream and you can actually see be back in a sec instead of starting soon. So let me quickly add the app group capability to both the IF tracker and the IF widgets extension. So I will just call it something like this. And yeah, so that should be good. Okay, let's use that. So it's set up for the app now, and let me also add the app group for our widget extension. And in there, I will copy paste the identifier. So now the provisioning profile is updating, and it looks like I now have the app group set up for both the app and the widget. So I can quickly also create a new file. And I will call that secrets.swift. And in there, I will just define a let app group ID. And I'll just add the string in there. So I'm good to go. Oh, I'm sorry about the audio being low. I already have it set to be as loud as possible in OBS. But thanks for the feedback. I'll move a bit closer to the microphone. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, so I'm back. All right, so with the app groups now set up, I created that secrets.swift file, not clicking on it. Really have to pay attention that I'm not opening that. But I think the app group identifier isn't really that secret for a dummy app like that, just trying to be safe out there. So we'll use that identifier to create a user default store based on a suite. So let's say let store equals user defaults with a suite name, and that will be, oh god, what did I name it? App group ID. All right, but I think this is optional, right? Yeah, this is optional. So let's say let's guard this, and if we can't create the store, we will return dot result, and let's see, can we pass an error in there? I don't think so. If you know that if we can return an error with the perform method of an app intent, let me know, then we will implement that as well. But for now, we will just return an empty result and basically not do anything. But if we do have access to the user default store, which should always be the case, don't get me wrong, so I think this guard statement will never get into the else part, because we did add the app group capability, so it should always work. Just if anything gets changed in the future, this might fail, but I honestly have no idea why this would fail. And then we can just say, so how do we want to do that? Let me think about it for a second. Yeah, so I think we will say let is fasting equals store.bool for our key is fasting. I believe that was the key, right? Let me just copy that just to make sure, but it should be good. This is non-optional, right? Yeah. So we're getting back a boolean here for whether the user is currently fasting or not. And then we want to write that back to the store. So store.set value. Can we set bool? No. Okay, so we will have to set value is fasting, not is fasting. So we are basically just toggling that for the key is fasting. All right, so that should basically be everything that we have to do in our toggle fast intent, I would believe. So now in the widgets, we can change this button, get rid of the closure here, and instead use the initializer passing an intent. So we will use the toggle fast intent. So let's see if that works. I'm not sure if interactive widgets do work in the preview anyways. So let's perhaps just run that on a simulator real quick to see what we've implemented so far, and to also find out whether this app storage property wrapper works. If it doesn't, then we will have to do the same user default stance that we just did in our intent in the timeline provider, save that to our timeline entry, and then read from that entry here in our widget view instead of using the app storage property wrapper. Interesting. So we did get an error message, but let's open the simulator real quick. There it is. Okay. So let's remove the widget and let's instead run the entire app. Maybe that works. Oh, so sorry about that sound. I just hit the microphone. Hope that wasn't too loud. I'm sorry. All right, so we have the app with, we can start and stop fasting. And let's see if we can add the widget. So IF tracker. Okay, so it shows up in here. Let's add the system small widget. All right. So it's saying start fasting right now. We can tap on that, but nothing really happens. So in the IF tracker app also nothing really happens. So give me a second to kill the app and let me open it again. Still saying start fasting. Ah, okay, yeah. that makes total sense because we're not using the app group in our main app. So let me grab this user defaults initializer in here. Let's copy that and let's go into our main app, and in the window group we will say if let store equals this user default store. Only then we will show the content view, and we will set the default app storage to our store. And this way we will actually use the shared user default store for our app. And else we will just show an error message. We will say user defaults not available. Not the nicest approach, but it works for now. Just want to get the example working. So we can start the fast right now. And okay, that works. Interestingly, the widget doesn't update. So perhaps can we do that through our toggle fast intent? So in my testing, it did update from time to time, not super reliably and also not super quick. So it should say stop fasting because we are fasting right now. Maybe, so there could be two issues here. Maybe the widget didn't get updated, or our property wrapper, our app storage property wrapper doesn't work. So we can just try that out by setting it to true and see if it will now say stop fasting. And it now does say stop fasting. So let's set it to false again, which would mean that we're using this default value instead of reading from app storage. Yeah, okay, so it looks like the app storage property wrapper is not working. So we will have to get our data through the simple entry from our timeline provider. So in the timeline provider, let's create a function. So I will call it, I will actually just call it is fasting, and this will return a Boolean. Does this have to be a function, or could this also just be a computed variable? I think it could just be a computed variable. So let's do it like that. I think that's a bit cleaner. And let's copy this guard statement in here, and let's use that in here. So we want to get our user default store. If we can't, we'll return false. We'll just say the user is not fasting if we can't read it. In reality, you might turn this into a result and return an error here instead. We might do that in the future. I just want to get some sort of project going right now. And then in the next stream, we can look into persisting the data and so on. So I just want to have a simple project. So then we can return store.bool for key is fasting. And don't forget the return. We can't use implicit returns in here since we have other statements in this computed variable as well. If we only had this statement, then we could omit the return and use Swift's implicit return feature. All right, so now that we can get whether the user is fasting, let's add that to our simple entry. So a timeline entry always has to have a date associated with it, but this emoji is just an example from the pre-generated widget that Xcode provides to you. So instead of having an emoji string here, we will say is fasting is a bool that we want to have in there. And then let's actually, I think we can just comment out this preview entirely because we will not be using it since it doesn't support interactive widgets anyways. So we might use it to create a design for our widget later on, but right now we can get rid of it and save some work. So for the placeholder, I think I will always just use the actual real data in here. I don't think we need to mock anything anywhere. So let's just copy paste that everywhere. And let's get rid of the app storage property wrapper. And this will now be entry.isFasting. Should we rename this simple entry to toggle fasting entry? I think that makes sense. So how does that work now? Okay, so right click, refactor, rename, and I will call this toggle fasting entry. And let's also rename it in the commented out preview down there. Okay, so that should be good. We can also explicitly specify toggle fasting entry in here instead of saying provider.entry. I think that's a bit cleaner. Okay, so all of that should be good. Let's now think about, or let's try this in the simulator real quick just to see if it now actually works. So the app says stop fasting, so the widget should also say stop fasting. That's great. If we click the button, it now says start fasting, and the same in the app. So that's great. So we're now sharing our user defaults flag is fasting from the widget to the app and vice versa. So we can start a fast in the app that will not update the widget because we haven't written any logic to update the widget. So let's do that real quick in a content view. So let's we can keep SwiftData because we will use that later on to store the data. So I will import widget kit, and then there's a handy thing called the widget center .shared, and here we can reload our timelines. And I think I will just reload the timeline with this kind in here. I'm not a big fan of that string, but I think it should work for us right now. So let's run that again in the simulator. So both of them say stop fasting, and if we actually click that, both of them should now say start fasting, and that's great. So whenever we click the button in the app, the widget will get reloaded as well. All right, so that is nice so far. We can now start and stop a fast, and the widget will reload either way, no matter where we click the button. So that's really nice. That is the first very basic implementation that I wanted to have done. The second part of that will then be saving the fasting start date, the end date, and the duration to SwiftData, so we can then show that in the main app, just to have some charts and some overview in there. But I think I will do that in the next live stream. So I've been live for 46 minutes now, so I will be chatting a bit with you, but I don't think I'll be writing any more code today. I'll do that in the next live stream or the next video on the topic. So Lucas is asking, so the issue was we cannot use property wrapper inside a widget there? Yeah, exactly. So this widget view is apparently not supporting the app storage property wrapper, which makes sense from some point of view because these views are static. So I think they just get created once, and then the body gets rendered once, and that gets cached and shown to the user depending on your timeline entries. That kind of makes sense why we can't use app storage in here, just as we can't use the task modifier or the onAppear modifier in our widget views, which is why in all of my tutorials I have all of the logic in my timeline provider, because that's where it actually gets executed, and then we can pass all of that data, which in here is just the isFasting flag, to our widget view. So we can still load data without using the app storage property wrapper. So yeah, that was the issue. So Edward is asking, can I use interactive widgets in Flutter? I have no idea. As you can see, I'm using Swift and Swift UI. I have no idea about cross-platform development, React Native, Flutter. I have no idea about what's supported there. My guess would be that eventually it will be supported, but I actually believe that widgets in Flutter might actually be implemented in Swift UI. I'm not sure, so you will have to look into that yourself. My guess is that all of these cross-platform frameworks probably take some time to adopt new features. So I think it's not possible right now, and then probably in a few weeks or months. But if anyone has a better understanding of that, make sure to chime in. I'm just guessing in here. And Lucas is saying will be possible. Yeah, so that makes sense. So I would guess that it's in the work. But of course, the third-party frameworks need some time to implement all of this stuff, which definitely makes sense. So let me quickly recap what we did in the stream. So we created a very simple, let me open it again in the simulator. So we created a very simple app with just a single button to start and stop a fasting period. We then also added a widget with the same simple button to add or to start and stop a fasting period, which is an interactive button, so it refreshes the widget. For that button, we created a toggle fast intent, which gets the shared user default store from our app group, reads whether the user is currently fasting, and then just toggles that value. So in here you can see the small exclamation mark. That's where it gets toggled. And SwiftUI and WidgetKit do their magic and automatically refresh the widget. We also use the new container background. It is a view modifier, but I would actually call it a widget modifier to set a default background color for our widget. And Lucas is saying in Flutter, widgets are in SwiftUI, so you can just copy the code here actually. Okay, so that's even better. So then it is possible to create interactive widgets. So you can just watch my interactive widgets tutorial, which is already up on the channel for a few weeks now actually. And you can just try to integrate that with your Flutter app. Good luck with that. I'd love to hear how that goes in just a comment under one of the videos, or just tweet at me at FlowRightsCode on Twitter. Alright, so that's it for the first stream back in a year. 50 minutes, we got a bit of stuff done, not too much, but we will look into setting up SwiftData in the next stream, and then we might actually implement some UI as well, because right now the app is very boring. It's just a plain button, not even a button style. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in a bit. Bye bye.